Hello, everyone, and welcome to Piloting the Future. This is the second episode of our limited series called Gridlock, Who Will Power the AI-Driven Data Center Future? In this limited six-part series, we explore a pivotal question. Who will power the AI-driven future? The utilities building the backbone of the grid, or the tech giants rewriting the rules at the edge? In this series, we go behind the scenes with industry insiders to get the key insight on industry obstacles in light of this new need to power our AI-driven future. From capital and innovation budgets to the changing distribution models and regulatory shifts, each episode will examine the structural forces at play in redefining this new grid. Lee, welcome. I am so excited for the second episode. We've got some amazing guests and a great topic.
I'm very excited for it. I can't wait. I just don't want to talk too much on this one.
It's going to be hard. We have a lot of great guests. So in this episode, we'll be speaking on the innovation bias to catch everybody up to speed. If you missed our first episode, it was on the capital bias. So to catch everybody up, last episode, we really zoned in on the utility business model and their tendency to lean towards a capital spending bias. At that podcast, the EEI had just published their July 23rd report on IOUs and the capital spend over the last 10 years, and $1.3 trillion had been spent, and another trillion was planning on being spent through 2029, 2030 on this new AI build out. So we got in super deep on the capital spend, and our superpowers in the energy industry are really to spend capital. But on the other side of the equation, we have what is known, or what I'm calling, the innovation bias. And that is, if we look at utilities R&D budgets, they invest about 0.1% of their EBITDA or revenue back into their R&D program. Lee, you worked at a utility. You managed or had a part of this R&D budgets at some of your old utilities. Can you provide a little insight on this innovation bias?
Yeah, it's very difficult for a utility to be focused on innovation. At San Diego Gas and Electric, we tried to. We actually had a CEO come in and make it not allowed. Jeff Martin, it was not allowed to talk about innovation. He just wanted to talk about the bottom line, getting back to basics. So often you have no authorization to do R&D, or you have a small amount of money that you can spend, but it's not often the priority, right? You have wildfires, you have high rates, a lot of things that come before that. You have to remember in technology, that's how they make money. They innovate, they get a product that nobody else has, they sell it, they make tons and tons of money. But with the utility, they're not going to make that money back. That's not how they make money. So they don't have that profit drive. And then why take the risk? You know, that you're risking. You might have stranded assets, and you might have all kinds of problems. Let the entrepreneurs take the risk, and then maybe you pilot it, and maybe you don't even do that. And then, of course, you're really focused on safety. And so it's hard to focus on innovation when you could have an outage, you could have an injury, you could have a death. And so it's just not the focus of the utility.
So when we compare that spend on R&D in the energy industry with the typical budget of a tech giant, to your point, Lee, it looks like they spend one major hyperscaler tech giant will outspend our entire industry 10 times. So as we think about how this new future is emerging and what's happening at the edge here, it's important to really be comparing and contrasting just how are things changing and where will the advantage lie as we move into the need to innovate or get left behind. And on that note, I wanted to say it's hard to use the word innovation today, Lee, as you mentioned, but today it's harder to use it because it sounds expensive. And so we really are being pushed by affordability. So we have a great couple of panelists here that are going to address that. And then finally, this week, a big nail in the coffin was a report that came out from MIT. We'll be talking about this with our guests, but an MIT report claimed this past July that 30 to 40 billion in enterprise spending on Gen AI is seeing a 95% failure rate. So, and in the report, energy didn't even have a single use case. So I wrote an article on this yesterday because I know just from the utilities that we're innovating with, their Gen AI use cases are actually going to production at scale. So It's going to be a lot of fun.
It is.
So fasten your seatbelts. It's time to talk about when we're moving ideas to impact on Series 2 of Gridlocked.
Let me introduce our fantastic guests. We have Mike Smith, principal at KLN Group. We have Erik Helland, commissioner at Iowa Utility Commission, and Jason Wild, co-founder and CEO at Wild Innovation and Strategy Excellence and co-author of the forthcoming book, Genius at Scale. Welcome to Piloting the Future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start by getting our guests' take on innovation in the energy industry. Are we spending enough? Are we getting the results we want? Are we going fast enough? Erik, you were recently on a NARUC webcast about the Berkeley report. Can you help us understand what you think about the report findings and why it's important at this moment as the hyperscalers are putting pressure on utilities to move faster?
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate everybody having us on today. There's a number of things in the report that I think stuck out, and one of them is the scale of the challenge to innovate within the industry. There are a number of reasons. There is no one reason, and all of those reasons typically have long-standing traditions or laws or cultural issues behind them. And so I think one of the things that the report really underscores is the scope and dare I say how entrenched the challenge of innovating within this industry. And then another thing that strikes out, not just from the report, but from having these conversations in webinars, podcasts, and then just through our national association, is perhaps a disconnect between all sectors here. I think it's fascinating when you talk to venture capital, and they're talking in terms of a year, maybe 18 months, and a utility, they plan in 20, 30 years. I'm not sure they do anything without an 18-month plan. And so you've got a different change. You've got a big difference in time scope. And then circling back to your R&D investment, like Kim got me going down a rabbit hole yesterday, and so when I started looking at the R&D investment, when you look at the disparity in spend, it's not just spending. You're talking about a scope in an industry just in sheer size, right? So like the big three hyperscalers spend more on R&D than the CapEx or the capital market capital value of all but like 8 utilities, right? So if they are literally spending more on R&D than the entire utilities valued at, right? And so I think I thought I was kind of integrated into this innovation and had a sense of kind of the size and the scope. And when you start saying like, no, like these are large users, they want to break things, move fast, they're used to innovation. It's, they're literally spending multiples the total worth of the investor-owned utilities that I'm regulating. I mean, it's just the sheer scale, I think, is kind of staggering. And then I think one of the things that, if you read between the lines of all of this, is the utility industry understands it. I think the commissioners understand it, is we all have a role to play. The commissioners, the IOUs, the entrepreneurs, capital, everyone. We're all part of the problem, and we all have to therefore be part of the solution going forward. And I think a lot of that starts with just, open conversations. Innovation doesn't have to be a scary word to talk about. You need to be able to talk about it without having to like sneak off into a corner. But you also, we might have to accept the fact that utilities, as much as we get them comfortable, are always going to be a little risk adverse. So I think just the scope and the size of the challenge sitting in front of us is really jumps out off that report.
Well, there are so many utilities, right? And they don't make money by inventing something new.
No, and like let's be honest. Let's call the commissioners out here a little bit, right? Like let's say you try something innovative and new, and I'm not going to say fails, right? Let's say you learned something, but you didn't learn what you wanted to, right? Because if you're not failing, you're probably not trying hard enough either. And so, if it doesn't go the way you want it to, well, then the utility or the commissioners, may very well drag you in and, give you a bit of a tongue lashing at best, or a performance plan at worst because it didn't work. Okay, well, what if it worked really well? Well, maybe we should be returning that to the consumers right now. I mean, we have to be able to understand that if you're a utility, it's not just an economic disincentive to take risk. It's a political and regulatory risk as well. And so I think if commissioners are going to be a part of this conversation, we probably also have to look at one another too and say, which is not easy for anybody in a government world, but you say, hey, like maybe we got a role in this as well.
Also, I was part of a proceeding where a utility did a lot of great innovative work. They got it working. They had a business case, but then a technology company came in and convinced the commission they shouldn't be allowed to deploy it after they showed that it was great.
There is something here that I think everybody outside, I mean, in a previous life, and to a certain extent, I still wear an entrepreneurial hat. And I think one thing that is really hard for people that don't work with and in and around governments frequently, that's really hard to like wrap your head around, is that there is an inherent risk and challenge with the very necessary transparency that comes with government. And that is that all of your competitors see everything that you do, and everybody who may want to poach your idea can see what you want to do, and they can also come in and undermine you. And so you've got, and to be clear, like you've got to have transparency, and I absolutely support transparency, but you also have to understand that it fundamentally alters that marketplace. And so I think so many entrepreneurs, capital that maybe sit tangentially to the utility world, we all thrive, if not love, that environment of creative destruction, right? Like we love this idea that we're going to come up with a new idea and create a new model, and we want to work with that. In government, there's just so many different forces at play that aren't normally there, that just fundamentally alter it on a very public stage, in the sense that it creates an already risk adverse environment, or I shouldn't say, it makes an already risk adverse environment riskier yet. And it's hard to quantify that. I'm sure somebody somewhere at a university has, but the end result can be a stymieing of those that are you normally willing to take. I think I'm surprised to hear that, Lee, because I would say most of the utilities that the executives that I know, if given the opportunity to try something new and to innovate, I think they would like to. But so I'm a little surprised to hear someone come in and say you can't innovate. Don't even say the word. But I think it's incumbent upon on commissioners to, we still need to do our job. We still need to balance, and we still need to, protect, well, balance. I hate to say protect, but balance the needs here. But it's also kind of incumbent upon us to be cognizant of our actions, and make sure that we're helping to foster an environment where our investor owns can, use some innovation to serve, the customers.
Jason, you've worn many hats, from working at utilities to leading innovation at some of the tech giants like Microsoft, Salesforce.com. Can you help us understand the MIT report finding that despite 30 to 40 billion in enterprise investment into Gen AI, that the surprising result is that 95% of organizations are getting zero return? Are we just all that bad at piloting and innovating?
Well, thanks, Lee. And it's great to be a part of this podcast with you, Kim, and this great panel. And by the way, I'm also a proud advisor and investor of Innovation Force. So yes, this now famous and viral study that was published by Nanda, which is a very interesting department that's been spun out of MIT to basically look at, creating a foundation for a global artificial intelligence system and model. And naturally, they're, interested in things like open source, but also getting their thought leadership out there, which intentionally or not, they did a very good job of. Funny enough, many, many moons ago, actually last century, I started my career in regulated utilities in North America, working then for IBM, and as a part of their innovation team, spent several years with utilities. And I'll never forget one of the first meetings that I had. We were very curious to understand and explore their customer strategy. And I won't say who the utility was, and it wasn't that long ago that utility called it, one of the executives called a timeout in the meeting and said, "Customers? We don't have any customers. We call them ratepayers."
The customers are the CPUCs. are the PUCs.
Yeah, they pay the bills, and I think I'm still calibrating around that one. And now, almost 30 years later in my career, I've been really blessed and honored to have led projects in 40 countries in pretty much every industry, working with organizations like NATO, Disney, City of Paris, and still very much, value the time that I spent with the regulated utilities. And sounds a bit cliche, but as I've reinserted myself into the industry, actively over the last few years through Innovation Force and other projects, in some ways it feels like it hasn't changed. In other ways, it feels like it's changed a lot. And there are a couple of things, around the MIT report. I've pretty much spent my entire career trying to help enterprises grow, transform, and innovate in some form of that. And if there's anything that I've learned, I've got lots of gray hair and scars from the experience, is that of all the challenges we have on the planet, our greatest challenge is changing human behavior. So think about it, right? When you look at that report, and I believe a lot of the findings in the report, but I think it needs a little bit of reframing, right? Because if you're a startup and you're using generative AI, it literally feels like magic. And the things that you're able to do, right, with just this raw intelligence now in your hand or in your pocket, that you weren't able to do just a couple of years ago, literally feels like it's an alien being. So why is it that it's so powerful for a startup, but yet, 95%? And I was not surprised when I saw that headline. Now, when I kind of scratched beneath the surface, what they said was 95% of AI pilots in enterprise have had no demonstrable impact on P&L. Now, of course, they ignored impact on perceived stock price. And I haven't done a scientific study, but I think we've all seen that as more organizations and CEOs are talking about AI and AI being an engine of transformation and new ways of working, it's not a coincidence that within the next 24 to 48 hours, many of those stock prices are popping. So I think, the reality is we're still very, very early in the deployment of this. And I think that if there's any blame, I think the blame is shared. I think that there's really big expectations that people have. When my 8-year-old and my grandmother are both talking about AI and asking me if they can trust it, we've obviously entered a new part of the universe and new world. But at the same time, when I look at your industry, the good news is right, talking about data centers and AI consumption of energy, I think EPRI, Kim, be honest here, Kim and Lee said very recently, like 4.5% of energy consumption in the United States, but it's going to be 9% here in a few years. So for me as an innovator, I get excited about that because for many reasons, but number one, there's no way that we're going to get there through incremental thinking. This is going to require new thinking and new doing. And sure, there's some great insights from the MIT report. But I learned at IBM many, many years ago that try to avoid pilots, especially in big companies, because not everything goes well in a pilot. There's always some problems. There's always some speed bumps and turbulence. And at the same time, there's always going to be naysayers in an organization who want to keep the focus on the status quo or keeping the lights on. So it can be very easy to just provide some ammunition and evidence and data to get those people to say, no, we shouldn't be taking those risks. No, we shouldn't be innovating. And so I think the reality is, look, we're still very early. If you look at some of the insights from their report, one of the things that definitely resonated with me was not a real focus on what use cases. Sometimes trying to tackle multiple business and even technical problems in the same thing. And if you look at the ones, what can we learn from the 5% that succeeded? Well, they were focused. They weren't focused in the sense of trying to optimize a silo or pour new technology on an old way of doing things or an old playbook. No, it cut across departments and functions, but was singularly focused on trying to improve one problem or one opportunity and not trying to boil the ocean. So remember, we're still early, and there were a lot of naysayers. So I've been told, and I read when electricity came out, but it took a few years for the light bulb to go off and people to realize that this is kind of a big deal. And it's a big deal in the sense it's going to change pretty much every aspect of how we work and live. And that's how I feel. I feel that we're actually under hyping how much change is coming.
Yeah, you don't have to go all the way back to the light bulb to discuss how early it is for AI, because if you just go back to the PC, I mean, early on, people were not getting productivity, especially companies were not getting productivity gains. They were mostly using it as a typewriter. And I remember instead of doing my slides by hand with markers, yes, we used to do that. Suddenly we were using the computer to do it, and people expected it to be prettier. So I spent more time, on it because I had the computer and my productivity went down. And then when the internet came out, I mean, people were using it. I used to surf the web at work to look at Satchel Sports, to see sports scores, and it was line at a time until ESPN bought them. And yet those technologies obviously have increased productivity 10 times over. They are all over our life. It just takes time for those things to happen. And I agree with you. AI is going to be absolutely huge. Mike, back in the day when I was on panels with you, you would always ask the tough questions. So this is my opportunity to get even. What do you think about the connection between affordability and innovation? This stuff costs a lot.
In answering that, I'm going to just step back from targeting that just a little bit. I've been in the industry for 35 years. So I started as an analyst studying SCADA systems. And back then we would forklift them out and put a new one in and all that kind of stuff. So obviously there's been a lot of change. Earlier in my career, one of the things I had an opportunity to do was do a lot of organizational development work with a guy who wrote a book called The Reengineering Alternative. And what that did, along with some other academic work, was it looked at organizational culture. And time again, being a utilities guy, it always came back to utilities are fundamentally operational excellence cultures. So when you talk about innovation, sometimes it feels a little bit like the square peg in the round hole. We're an operational excellence organization. Raw material comes in, finished product goes out, manufacturing, process industries, et cetera. It sounds a lot like utilities have been historically. So I think we have to recognize that we have some challenges in dropping innovation into something that's fundamentally risk averse, focused on that operational excellence, which of course includes reliability and safety, which are paramount for what utilities are doing. So that's my first thought. The second one, as we get back to innovation and affordability, is something that I think several of the panelists have touched on already, is this idea of the business model, and you all explore that in depth at your last episode. But when I think of the changing business model, I think more in terms of it's being forced on us as an industry. And if we don't get on board, we're going to miss the boat. Let me give you a couple examples. I just pulled a few things in preparation for today. So I think nuclear is big. So you look at some of the things that are happening. Diablo Canyon about a year and a half ago was extended 5 years. In Michigan, you have Palisades, it's restarting. Iowa, you have Duane Arnold restarting. Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island restarting. And a lot of these are not being driven by the utility industry. They're being driven by need, much of it AI and data center need. So, the Metas and the Googles of the world are saying, Mr. and Ms. Utility, thank you very much. We're going to get this done with or without you. And I think we're seeing that happen, even though there is a very firm regulatory compact in which the utilities and energy has to operate. I think we're seeing that move, and utilities need to get on board with that. The other thing I'll mention, and then I'll get a little more specific, is as we're moving deeper into this energy transition, I think there's some realities that are coming into view that do affect the affordability question. Number one is nukes. I think SMRs are super interesting, and we've been doing them for 70 years in the Navy. Very successfully, and I'm an Army guy, and so for me to admit the Navy's doing something well is really doing something. The other thing I'll mention is the role of gas. I had an opportunity recently in a workshop to sit in a room with about 24 utility people, director to C-level, from many different utilities, munis, co-ops, and large IOUs. The reluctance to bring up that gas needs to be part of the energy transition. And that's a good thing. The reluctance to say that, particularly this one particular instance, they waited till the C-levels were out of the room, was very tangible. And again, I'm a 35-year utility guy. I want us to continue to be successful. This industry's been good to me. We paid off a mortgage and put our kids through college, right? So I want it to continue to be successful. So when you look at some of the things happening today and recently, California in August of 23, the California State Water Resources Control Board, that's a mouthful, they approved the extension of 3 gas plants with several thousand megawatts of generation. Lee, you're probably familiar with some of this being out here as well. Just today, Utility Dive or one of the other publications in Pennsylvania, there was an approval for a 944 megawatt behind the meter gas plant at a data center. This is very real stuff that we've been talking about for a while, but you open up Energy Central News or some of these other sources every day, you're seeing it every day now. So getting back to the affordability question, a couple of data points. One is I think we have to be very realistic about the energy transition and its impact. The International Energy Agency notes that electricity prices in the UK have tripled. They also have the richest renewable energy mix of any country. We can't ignore that. Getting more specific to utilities and the innovation and how I think we can move this forward in addressing affordability. 3 things I'll just mention. One is rates. I've done a little bit of work in the rate space with rate engines. I think there's a lot of really interesting potential around rate design and getting customers to understand rates, which is no small task. Next door, I have a dentist here and an engineer over here, and we were at a barbecue and no one understood their utility bill. So we have a long way to go, but there's a lot of potential in rates. Number 2 is technology. I've always been kind of on the technology analyst side of things. I look at things like virtual power plants and DERMS and I get excited. With Energy Central, I moderated a webinar last week on virtual power plants, and potential is very real and very tangible. So I think as an industry, we should be excited about that. And kind of embedded in all this is number 3, which is that role of the customer. When you look at that traditional role of the customer, and I think to Jason's point, ratepayer, right? So you have this at one end of the spectrum, the very static customer. I'll pay my bill, keep the lights on, and I'll be happy. To the other end, which is not just a customer that is aware or has a good experience or is engaged, but that customer is fully participating with the utility. I hear a lot about customer engagement, and I kind of raise my hand and say, they don't need to be engaged, they need to be participating. And that means customer programs, it means rooftop solar, all of those things, especially as EVs grow out here in Northern California where I'm based. So that role of the customer, getting them participating is another piece of that puzzle. But we have some challenges, and I think there's some realities we have to confront head on, and I've tried to draw a few of those out here today. So hopefully that helps add to the color of the discussion and gives people something to think about.
It certainly does. And certainly you and I are energy nerds, very much energy nerds, the things that get us excited. But you talked about a data center behind the meter investing in new significant generation. Doesn't that take us down a path of really messing with the utility future and with affordability when that is a possibility and a requirement?
Well, let's think about that. How does that affect residential customers for utility? I'm thinking out loud a little bit here right now, but I think it's a historic or traditional commercial or industrial utility customer finding their own solution because they can't wait. They can't wait for a regulatory, a commission process, all that stuff, which you know very well, takes a lot of time. So I think there's that. The other argument is, well, as the writing is on the wall, the role of the utility may be changing. Maybe there is more of a focus on residential customers. I'm just spitballing, but do they concede some of these large industrial customers? If you want to go build your own power plant, invest that money in that, that's fine. We'll charge you a monthly connection fee or whatever that looks like, because you're going to need us, whether you think so or not. You're going to need us. So maybe there's that role, and there's that greater focus on partnering with residential and small medium business. It has to change, and it is changing. I'm not sure what it'll look like, but I think those are some relevant questions to be asking.
Well, Jason, Erik, let me open that up to you too. What do you think that's a sign of, that a customer is building such a large plant? I mean, utilities like to have a large denominator. They like a lot of usage so they can divide their fixed costs amongst many customers, and this kind of takes that away.
I think the idea of affordability and innovation, especially in regulated utilities, is a really interesting one. at multiple levels, right? And I've worked in other industries where there's a higher risk tolerance and willingness to be first mover, first to market. To me, it's fascinating that it's almost like the secret in this industry is, hey, we really want somebody to go first as long as it's not us. And we're going to stay in contact and keep them engaged and make sure that we learn a lot from them. And, and you flip that around. I mean, you all know this, stating the obvious of your industry, especially the regulated utilities, is they're not in direct competition, right? So the ability to actually learn together, share information, and activate insights at scale is there. And for whatever reason, it's not delivering, I think, at the level that you expect. So I would look at that and just look at what's happening with ChatGPT and search, classic search, right? A year ago, no one could have imagined going onto the internet and not using something like Google or Bing search. Search is dying, and it's dying fast because look at the human experience, right? Would I rather wade through a million answers in, 0.08 seconds or get one curated answer that takes 8 or 9 seconds? Now, behind that, today, a ChatGPT search costs about 10 to 12 times the energy that you need for a Google search. But that's not going to stay static, right? And so I'm a big believer in constraints. And once I got out of the Western world and tried to innovate in places like China and India and Brazil, and this concept of frugal innovation, it is really, really, really powerful. So to just take one simple example of the AI innovation that's been coming out of China, on the back of the embargoes with the NVIDIA chips, right? Everyone, including very smart, billionaire, successful people, were basically expecting it to just continue to be in the status quo that it was in terms of access to those capabilities and the price points, et cetera, et cetera. And when that decision was made, it literally created a constraint around China that forced them to innovate around small language models and optimize energy consumption and what it actually takes to answer the Pareto principle of the 80% of questions that people are asking. So, right, if we don't put constraints around ourselves, then it's really hard for us to innovate. And then the other side is this industry was born out of innovation. There's a great futurist, Oren Harari, who has a quote where she says, electric light bulb did not come as a result of continuous improvement of the candle. So I find it really fascinating that you're an industry that was born out of innovation. But yet, and Mike, I'm with you, and I've been there many, many times. It's all about operational excellence. So how do you start to, I think, reframe that in a way that gets people to see innovation as not being expensive or risky, but being essential? And I think some of that is the opportunity to use data. It's a data-intensive industry, but I think you've been picking and choosing data for specific decisions and places. But I would encourage the industry to be much more expansive and say, as the leadership team at the beginning of our fiscal or calendar year, what are 2 or 3 really hairy, complex questions that today we'd love to have the answer, and in 9 to 12 months probably will lead us to even sharper, better questions and help us shine a light on what kind of data do we need to generate or earn the right in a good, not creepy way from some of our collaborators and partners to share so that we can get smarter about these questions and get into a flywheel of continuous learning, because it's a very smart, curious industry that uses a lot of data, but I feel like you're stuck a bit in that old paradigm.
Ironically, it might be AI that you're asking those questions to that comes up with some of these answers. Just throwing it out there. Erik?
Yeah, well, and to build on Jason, and I think Mike said, kind of said the same things, that we may be underestimating our use of AI. Every time we're creating and using AI, we're creating more data to draw more conclusions off of more data. And so, data begets data. And at some point, I was telling our commission a month or so ago, at some point we have to come to grips with the most valuable asset we own is our data. And I think utilities are quickly understanding that as well. One of the things that I think is fascinating and Mike alluded to some of these behind the meter agreements, and even in our state here with Dwayne Arnold, which I can't and shouldn't talk about, so I won't. But what I think is fascinating about, from a commission perspective, watching this unfold, is the change in demeanor and culture of these two titans of an economy coming in contact with one another, and they are so wildly different. But I don't know the 1885 market cap of Sears and Roebuck, right? But I'm sure it was big. I doubt the disparity was there between the railroads and Sears and Roebuck, but this is literally like a customer that is so much bigger and so much more nimble, with the ability to move within markets much faster and an appetite for risk like they have never seen. And so, I think initially there was very much a traditional approach to it. And then, like, once everybody, and then I think this is true of commissioners too, once everybody kind of wrapped our head around the magnitude and the size of what was coming, everybody went, oh, this is real. This is real. And it's now, and it's right here. And you've got players that will make it happen, and historically don't really take no for an answer. It's like, we'll just go break it and fix it. And so I think that level of pressure creates an opportunity, right? There's an entire universe of those of us. Most of us are either watching these kinds of podcasts or contributing to them or reading books and materials surrounding this, that are risk adverse and see these opportunities, or see these risks as opportunities and abilities to create the industry. And so I think internally, conversations are starting to be had, even amongst commissioners and amongst policymakers, that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, or they get squashed with a got to keep the lights on, always got to keep the lights on. And now that need, that demand, and that size is here. What I don't want to say that I'm concerned, but what is foremost at my mind, and what I want to try to press forward among policymakers is, usually the first line of my banking law book said, rightfully, every law written about banking regulation has been done so in reaction to a catastrophe, right? We have to make sure as an industry that doesn't happen in the utility world. We can't be adjusting our regulatory structure retroactively because something bad happened. We are now in a world where we have to start thinking proactively, but that's just wildly different. You've got 150 years of policy, law, and economics pushing you the other way. And I think one of the upsides of having that paradigm shifting customer that's that big is it's forcing a different conversation to happen. And I'm hopeful that creates a proactive conversation and something that we can ease into rather than just wait. I think Jason talked about nuclear, right? Like, I've been joking now for a year that this whole nuclear investment thing feels like a pool party, where everybody's literally sitting on the side saying, well, if you jump, I'll jump. And if somebody just jumps, everybody will go. But again, it's almost like a game of chicken, right? It's like we're sitting there, we're being risk adverse, and we think we need to do it, but we're just not quite ready to jump. And it feels like that nexus is coming faster than most of us real.
No, I was just going to say, building on what Erik said, I know at the beginning we talked about R&D budget, and absolutely the right place to look for as being one of the sources of innovation, right? When I started my career at IBM, one of the big, hallmarks of tech-driven R&D, the philosophy was, oh yeah, innovation that happens in R&D. And part of the culture shift that an external CEO, Lou Gerstner, who didn't come from technology broad, was, no, it's the job of everyone to innovate. And it sounds so basic, but I really do believe that. So when you combine R&D and IT and your IT budget in this increasingly digital world, my team at Salesforce a couple of years ago did some research around tech debt and typical IT budgets of Fortune 500 companies. In cross industry, your typical Fortune 500 legacy company has 70 to 80% tech debt. So 70 to 80% of their IT budget is basically kept is focused on keeping the lights on, and the remainder, 20 or 30%, on governance and innovation, with the best practice really being flipping that pyramid, 70 to 80% on innovation and governance, 20 to 30% keeping the lights on. Now, you're all smart, and I'm sure our listeners are smart in understanding where I was going with this, because that was just the average cross industry. Regulated utilities are even worse. And your typical regulated utility might have 85 to 90% tech debt. So what I would encourage you is look at the silver lining of that, and what we couldn't have even dreamt of doing with technology just a couple of years ago. And now if we start with a blank sheet of paper and start to rethink what's possible, and not just in the R&D budget, but with the IT budget, and redirecting as much of that as we can to truly innovative initiatives. And I would encourage, it's provocative, that every public utility commission and every regulated utility has some goal in terms of how they're going to pay down that debt and reinvest it into true innovation that customers and taxpayers value.
Yeah, just two things, actually, pretty briefly. Jason, what you were describing about everyone kind of wants to do stuff, but no one wants to go first. We always call that the fast second. Someone wants to be the fast second. Our industry is just so notorious for that. Oh my God, that was really cool. Tell me how you did that and I'll do it too. Okay, yeah, there's that too. The other thing, I just, particularly in light of affordability, which we're bouncing around with here in this current environment of exploding load demand driven by AI and data centers and electrification, of course. I had a discussion with a guy who is the manager of electric transportation for a large investor-owned utility back east about 2 years ago. And he said, we've done this before. It's like the 60s and 70s. We had air conditioning, right? That just, our load just went crazy. Yeah, but that, honestly, they just built their way out of that, right? That option's kind of gone, because while we're seeing similar explosive growth, or maybe even more pronounced explosive growth, we're reinventing the way we generate and deliver energy. And those two things are proving to be extremely difficult. And as an industry, I think, again, I think I used the term harsh realities that need to be confronted earlier in our session today. And I think as an industry, we really need to do that. We're starting to see some of it, but it's an interesting time. I think our industry has done it before. I think we'll do it again, but there are some of those difficult realities we really need to confront. So I'll end my comments on that, but this has been great. Thank you.
Yeah, the one thing I would add back to put a pin in the, utilities are risk adverse. Those that regulate them are even more risk adverse. I mean, if you want to try to innovate within the utility world, try trying to innovate within government. I mean, it is another level of difficult. And so, I think that is something we have to have, this communication beyond commissioners. This communication has to go to legislators, governors, and a lot of states you have elected PUC, right? And so we have to be very careful. Somebody in here earlier said we're all energy nerds. I've yet to meet somebody in the energy sector that's not a nerd, which is probably the reason why I love this sector. I know I'm a nerd. I don't care. I mean, look, you see my bookshelf. I don't strike up a lot of conversations with normal people without them going, that's kind of weird. But we have to take this conversation out to consumers and voters, and so that it can help, continue to drive that conversation and create that place where we all realize, like, this is different, right? This isn't air conditioning. This isn't electrification. This isn't EVs coming online. This is different. This is fundamentally different. And having that communication and that education, even beyond the commissioners and beyond our echo chamber of wonderful nerds, we have to start, all of us, kind of becoming educators of just the general public of what this means to everybody. And if we don't, it just makes all of our challenges all the worse, because we don't have a true marketplace actually providing that education. And I think that might be one of the things that's really holding us back.
Yeah, I love marketplaces. So to wrap everything up, I think what you guys are saying is really, this is a huge leadership opportunity. As much as it is a technical challenge, and it's a challenge, is an opportunity for us to move to move this industry at a faster pace. On the Visionaries Take, we'll turn this into the hot seat, as Lee said. Look, on our first episode, we were kind of tongue-in-cheek, joking around about the financial power of the tech giants, and they have so much capital. Like, they could literally just buy the utility because you're moving too slow, get out of our way. And then we finished that podcast, and then Minnesota Power is now in the process of being acquired by BlackRock. And then, so a lot of people are saying, oh, is this the canary in the coal mine? So for the guests, we'd like to know, as an industry, what do you think? A, are we in trouble? B, is this just an important reflection point that we find ourselves at? Or C, it's just business as usual.
All right, I'll get this party started. I guess I'm the wannabe innovator, Kim, so I'm going to say D. I'm going to invent a new one that I think it's going to be a powerful external catalyst of needed change. And why do I say that? Because several years ago, with the hype and the expectations around electric vehicles, BlackRock and Blackstone were buying independent gas stations up and down the East Coast, feeling that there was an arbitrage opportunity because, looking 8, 10, 15 years out, that real estate was undervalued and unappreciated. And, some were saying, ooh, is that the end of chain gas stations? Well, no. It was a good wake-up call for a lot of them to, ask themselves the question of why do we exist and for what customers and what do we sell? And I think that would be, me considering myself as an industry outsider, I think that would be a good accelerator of some needed change, because I've known people like Erik and Mike and others for many, many years, strong-willed, very capable people, and the issues are really structural from my experience. So I think BlackRock could stir the pot in a good way.
So I'm not sure what the categories were again, Kim, so I won't make it up, but I'll try to remember them. I would say right now, we're in a challenge, and we're in a challenge that, if allowed to escalate unchecked, will become a problem. But kind of to Jason's point, one of the things that I think is interesting about this one that is, I think, probably paradigm changing for the long run is we can't build out of it. Everybody knows we can't build out of this, and so for the first time in industry. And I know my utility friends are going to cringe when I say it. They got to learn how to really innovate and really lean into it. And that means commissioners got to learn how to innovate and really lean into it. And that means governors and legislators are going to have to learn how to lean into this, and customers. And so it is in a lot of ways, it is a cultural and societal on an entire sector learning how to do something that's never done before, but it has to. And so from that perspective, I'm pretty excited to be here and be a part of it. I'm not opposed to risk, so this is a little bit more natural for me than maybe for some of our colleagues. But I think what you're seeing amongst all of us is maybe I'll be a little cliche here, a pivot towards the future, right? We're starting to talk about how do we deal with risk and move faster, rather than, well, we'll just build another model and the model will tell us exactly what to do. And it's like, well, what if it doesn't? Or what if you can't do that model fast enough, right? And so I think you're for the first time seeing commissioners and utilities and entrepreneurs start to say, hey, maybe we don't look backwards. Maybe we just fundamentally have to figure out a different way to function. And we'll stub our toe here and there. But I think undoubtedly, maybe 10 years, somewhere in the reasonably near future, we'll look back and be like, you know what, that was good for us. It was uncomfortable, but it was good. It's a growing opportunity.
I consider myself an optimist. To quote Colin Powell, optimism is a force multiplier. So I'm going to call this a reflection point. And I think I'll add a caveat that it's a reflection point that needs to be grounded in reality. One of the quotes I heard at a conference I was at last week was, you cannot legislate against the laws of physics. So I think we have to recognize that. We have to stay grounded in reality, but we also have to really be forward thinking and really lean into some of these new things. If it's SMRs, great. If it's new business models, great. But we need some leadership, to your point, Kim. So that's where I see it.
Kim, I'm going to make up a D also. And my D, and it's going to get me some hate mail, I know. But it's going to be, we're going to do what we always do. We're going to talk a lot, but we're just going to wait and see.
And on that note, I think, Lee, we could fasten our seatbelts and come in for a landing on this one. It was a very, very interesting discussion amongst our guests and panel. Thank you so much for joining in the discussion. And shout out for everybody listening. If you found this conversation helpful, inspiring, controversial, please share it on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me and share a guest or topic that you think we should be covering as a part of this series on piloting the future, even gridlocked. And of course, we want to hear your bold predictions. So tag us on LinkedIn. Let us know what you're thinking. Heck, we might even have a poll on LinkedIn to see what you guys think after this podcast on who has the innovation advantage. So with that, I want to thank everybody for today's episode and bring it on in for a landing.
Yeah, it may be difficult, but lean in and innovate.